Hi, I'm Marcus with Academy, and in this series of videos, we are going to be taking a detailed look at Slate Digital's Infinity EQ2 update. Now, whether you're brand new to working within a digital audio workstation and plugins in general, or you already have some experience, in this series, we're going to take a look at everything that you need to know to get the most out of this incredible plugin. So to start off with, I thought we would take a detailed look at the GUI before we start going through some of the different features. So let's dive in. Okay, so I have a blank instance of Infinity EQ2 pulled up over here. First thing I want to point out is that if you're working on a different size monitor, you have the ability to resize this in a couple different ways. So first of all, if you click in the bottom right, notice that we have scale. Now, if I hover over here, we can see this is set to 100%. If I click, hold, and drag, then I can actually extend or expand the scale. You can see this is moving from 100% up to 125% here. And this will actually maintain the aspect ratio of this plugin. But if you wanted to resize this in a different way, maybe you wanted to extend it like this, or maybe you wanted to extend it horizontally and stretch things out a little bit more, we have a couple different options in terms of resizing. So once you have the size set to the way you want, let's go ahead and start up in the very top left-hand corner. Now, if we click the Slate Digital icon over here, this gives us some basic information about this plugin. So we can see Slate Digital, Infinity EQ, we have a version number, we have the actual type, which is ARM64 VST3 in this case, because I'm running Studio One. Now, if we scroll down to the bottom over here, we have some other useful options. So we have online support. We can have some information about our licenses if we want, but we also have the ability to click the user guide. Now, the user guide is very handy because in this case, literally any option that we have available from within this EQ, we can find this in the user guide by simply clicking through these pages. So if ever you have some time and you want to learn this inside and out, this is a really, really great option. Now, if you wanted to remove yourself from this area, we simply click anywhere on the GUI and we've removed ourselves. Now, starting in the top left, notice that we have this auto option. Now, this auto option by default is set so that anytime, let's just double click. We're going to skip ahead a little bit here, but let's double click to create a node. Notice that as I increase the boost, which we can do over here, or if I bring down and make this subtractive, that this is automatically adjusting based on 36 dB in this case. But let's say that we didn't need that much. Maybe we only wanted to have a view of, let's say, for example, 12. In that case, we can set this manually. So now if we make any adjustments here, this is set to 12. So this can be useful depending on what you need to do. I think in most cases, though, it's really useful to set this in auto. And also, I'm going to skip ahead again here, but let's reset this. Now, in the top left, we have the ability to show the presets. As we show the presets, we have these different categories that we can go through. We have hip hop, lo-fi, house, future bass, dubstep, pop, rock, etc. Now, also, we can choose presets from here. This is another way that we can access the presets. Brings us to the exact same menu. So, for example, mastering, and if we wanted to go with the balance preset, that's something that we can do. I'm going to click this option over here to hide the presets for a moment. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at is all of these options over here, and then we're going to move on to the next part of this course. So we have an undo and we have a redo, and this will quite simply undo your last action. So I've just made a quick move over there. If I click undo, I can undo that, and then of course we can redo that move as well. Now, if you want to reset the whole entire plugin, we can do that by clicking the Reset All function. And then, of course, if you made a mistake, you can choose the Undo option to correct that. In addition to that, we have the ability to choose between two different snapshots, if you will. So we have Snapshot A and we have Snapshot B. Now, right now, I don't have anything in Snapshot A. I only have something in Snapshot B. But let's say that you wanted to make some adjustments. You have the ability to copy from A over to B. And then we could head over to B. We could make a highlighted selection over here. We could make a few different adjustments. And then it's quite easy for us to toggle between A and B to see which one we like better. And then, of course, we could even load different presets if we wanted to in A and B. If we wanted to have a really quick way to addition these different presets, I could navigate over to B, and then I could choose a completely different preset, like something like loudness. Now, if we close our presets menu, we can toggle between these two presets. Now, in addition to that, we have some other options over here. Well, I guess the first one I should mention is, notice over here, I have the tooltips option has been enabled, and this gives us the ability to either hide or disable the tooltips. Now, the tooltips is an interesting thing because when you're first getting started with a plugin, they are very, very useful. So for example, anything that I hover my mouse over, I can have some basic information. Anything over here. So for example, this is the bypass. If I enable or disable this, that's happening. But sometimes if you've become familiar with the plugin, it can be a little bit annoying, so we can toggle this off. Now, next up, we have the ability to reset the spectrum analyzer. So I currently have this on the base. Let's have a quick listen. This is our spectrum analyzer that we're having. Let's say I stop. Notice that this is kind of a holding in place. If I click this option over here, I can reset this if I need to. Now, while we're on that topic, let's head over to the display settings. I'm going to click the display settings. We have quite a few different options. So we have a real-time analyzer. Let's go with that first. Notice this white outline that we see over here. This is happening in real time. Take a look at what happens if I turn this off. We no longer have that option. Now, I'm going to re-enable the real-time analyzer. This time, let's disable the average analyzer. Now notice that we've lost our average. We can bring this back by enabling this option over here, and our average is back. Now, in addition to that, we also have an option for a global curve. As we see a global curve, we get this solid white line that's appearing over top here. So this can be really, really useful in terms of just taking a look at a bird's eye view of what's happening with our EQ curve. It can be a lot more easy to pick this out. That being said, if it's a little bit too distracting, then we can quite easily have the ability to disable the global curve. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the curve menu on hover. If I hover over any one of these points, and it's worth mentioning not clicking the points, but quite simply just mouse hovering, that we get this useful curve menu. And this we can access any one of these parameters or any one of these functions just by quite simply hovering. If you would rather not have that behavior, because if you have a lot of different nodes, it might be a little bit visually distracting, then we can actually disable this feature. And then in order to actually get the curves menu, we would have to click one of these EQ nodes or these points over here, and this will come back. I'm actually going to leave this off for the duration of this tutorial. Now, we already spoke about the tooltips, and I think in general for the tutorial, it's actually useful to have the tooltips open, even though they can be a little bit distracting. I'm going to leave them off for now. We also have the ability to go full screen if we want to. And we can either click the GUI in the top right to exit full screen, or we can use escape. Either one of those is going to bring you back. Now, in terms of some of the options down here, we have the ability to bypass the plugin just by clicking here. And it's worth mentioning that this is just basically going to trigger a bypass from within your DAW of choice. So whether you're using audio units, VST3 version, or AAX, this plugin button is pretty much linked to the bypass. Now, we also have the ability to solo the left, solo the right. We can also solo our mid, or we can solo our sides. This we're going to get into a little bit further on down the line, but in addition to that, we have the ability to phase reverse or invert the phase or the polarity. We also have the ability to invert the left and right or mid-size processing order, and then we've already covered the scale. So that is pretty much it with respect to the basic GUI overview. In the next video, we're actually going to take a look at creating some nodes and working with these and some of the different options that we have available. All right, so in the previous example, we took a basic look at the GUI, and I would say that we probably have a good handle on about 90% of the GUI in terms of what all these different options do. And these are useful, especially in the beginning, because if there's certain options or things aren't working the way you want to, or if you need some help topics, it's definitely worth knowing how to load presets and how to work with them. But let's talk about the basics in terms of creating nodes and modifying them, and just some of the basics so we can kind of get started with this. If you hover your cursor in different parts of the GUI, notice that you might see different icons that are being indicated. So in this case, I'm actually seeing a low cut icon in terms of the GUI. Now, if I hover over here, I'm seeing something that's more indicative of a low shelf. Same thing if I go to the top end. Notice that this is a high shelf icon, and this is actually a high cut or a low pass icon. And then if I hover over here, we have what looks to be like a parametric band. As you might expect, any time that you were to make any adjustments, so for example, let's start off over here with this icon. If I was to double click over here, I have just created a high shelf. Now, if I was to head to the bottom section over here and double click, I have just created a low cut. Now, when we have a band selected and when we've created something such as we did just over here, we have a couple different options. So if we navigate to this menu over here, and keep in mind that preference that we had, which was right over here, which was curve menu on hover, I have that disabled. So if I re-enable that, that means that anytime I hover over an EQ node that I've made, that will automatically display. Maybe we will leave that on just for now. And if it gets annoying, if we have too many nodes, it might be something that we can take off. But if we now hover over this EQ node, we have some different options. So I can lock this. If this is set in stone and I don't want this to accidentally move, I can quite simply lock this, and then this is not going to move. Now, I also have the ability to choose different behaviors. For just momentarily, let's add 2 nodes. I'm going to add one over here, and I'm going to add one over here. Now, these are basic just parametric EQ bands that I've created. I'm going to select both of these, and let's click, hold, and drag to move these together. Let's say that we had created some type of band interaction. Maybe it's something that's a positive EQ, or maybe it could be something that's subtractive. If I always wanted these to be grouped together and move relative to each other, even if they have different settings, then I can basically select these both, hover over, and then I'll choose the option to group these bands. Now, what this means is that anytime I grab any one of these, I'm moving these together. Whether I move this up or down, it doesn't really matter, but I'm moving these together, and these will interact together. You could have 2 bands, you could have multiple bands. I'm going to select both of these though. Let's hover over again, and let's deselect or ungroup the bands over here. Now, in addition to that, if I hover over this EQ node or this EQ node over here, now if I click this one, notice we hover over here, we have some options in terms of whether we're using mid-side processing or stereo. Stereo, for the most part, is very useful. That means that you want everything to be affected the same way. If I add some boost, I want the boost to be applied across everything. If I do a cut, I want the cut to be applied across everything. But in certain cases, such as a mastering chain or something, you might want to have the ability to make adjustments between the mid, which is the center part of a signal, and the sides separately. So maybe you might want to have your high shelf to be something like, for example, just happening on the sides. And maybe you want to do another type of move where it's just being applied to the midsection of the processing. This is something we can do over here. Now, any one of these nodes that we select, let's put this back to stereo momentarily. Any one of these nodes that we select over here, we also have the ability to choose a type. So we've gone over some of the basics in terms of low shelf. We have our high shelf, we have our low cut, we have our high cut. But we also have things like notch filters, and then we have different types of actual parametric bands that have different behaviors. We even have something which I really love using, which is called a tilt shelf. And if you use this, then it's basically just anchoring a single EQ point, and then everything is moving together. This is a super useful set of tools. Now, the last thing I want to kind of focus on is that as we hover over these bands, because we have this particular feature enabled, which is our curve menu on hover, as we hover over these bands, we have these different options that are available in the GUI. And because we have our help topics that have been automatically selected, if I hover my cursor over here, you can see what's happening over here. We have the ability to hover over this band. We can adjust the dB per octave slope. And let's actually increase this so we can really see what's happening here in terms of the changes. We're adjusting the actual slope on this. And if we hover over this one, we also have the ability to adjust the Q or the width. So we have a lot of control that's kind of smart, and it's available just when we're hovering. But another thing that we have the ability to do is if we go down to the bottom section over here, notice that regardless of what's happening, even if I have this particular feature, the curve menu on hover, if I have this disabled, that as I select over here, we have some options over here, which is our frequency and our gain. Now, from within here, we also have the ability to disable or enable the plugins, and we can also solo different areas. So I could really hone in and focus on finding something. So this is now set to 147 Hertz, and I can scroll through this here. Can also adjust the gain, reduce that. But notice that if we hover over here now, we have the ability to do things like, for example, we can adjust the Q if we want to, and we can also adjust the slope. So we can really kind of contour things. So we have the ability to activate and deactivate from within hovering over any one of these nodes. We have the same option. We can activate and deactivate. We can also have the option to solo, which is available from our hover menu and also our main menu down here. But we also have a dynamics section, which we can expand simply by clicking the dynamics in the bottom over here. Now we're going to focus on this in the very next video, but momentarily, I just want to show one more thing before we move on. And that is that if you're working with minimum real estate and you already have an option, like for example, the curve menu over hover, then you might not necessarily need this coming up because we already have a lot of the intuitive stuff. Then we have the option to basically minimize this or compact this so that we can see these different options. And only if I need to do something, then I could maybe select this and I could unfold this so that it expands. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the dynamic section, and then we're going to get into some examples. All right, so now that we have a basic idea in terms of how to create EQ nodes and how to basically work with them, we can very easily create a low cut, a high shelf, a low shelf, a parametric band. It's very easy for us to adjust the Q or the slope or the width or any of those features. What I want to do in this case is take a look at one of the new features that was added to Infinity EQ2, which is the ability to create dynamic EQ nodes. More specifically, what that means and why it's useful. So let's move over to this example. I'm going to clear this out. Let's go ahead and press play. Okay, so we have a drum loop that's playing. Now, there's two different ways that dynamic EQ can be useful. One way is that you want to basically hone in on a very specific frequency section and have a threshold that's set. And when that threshold is exceeded or met, you want something subtractive to happen. The other way that we can use it is the opposite. Maybe you have a drum loop that sounds a little lackluster and you wish that somebody was playing the top end that was a little bit louder. You can set a threshold, and once that threshold is met, you can actually have the EQ move that's happening be additive. So they're both very, very useful. The way I'm going to approach this is on the low end, we're going to create something that's subtractive, and on the high end, we're going to create something that's additive. So to start off with, let's go ahead. I want to just take a really quick look at my settings. I have all these on. I want to see a global curve. I want the curve menu on, hover over. Let's reset this to start, and our tooltips are currently on. What I'm going to do is let's just hover our cursor till we get this option over here. I'm going to double click to create a node. And now if I solo this, okay, let's bring this down a bit. Okay, so let's say that I'm happy with that move. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here to enable the dynamics features. Now the way that this works is based on a target level and a threshold. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a target level of somewhere around -4. This is the maximum amount of reduction, but notice this is not a static offset. This is not like me pulling an EQ down 4 dB. This is the target level of what I want to happen with this. Notice that this is moving. We haven't even done anything. It's moving just from setting the target. Let's set the target lower. Notice we've just completely lost all of our bottom end. Let's actually do the opposite now. Let's set the target higher. Now we have a ton of low end. So the way that this works is, first thing we need to do is adjust our target. I'm going to limit this to say, let's somewhere around -4.5. Now currently, we have auto threshold that's been enabled. So this is automatically detecting the threshold, but I would actually prefer to show this in action by setting a manual threshold. So at 0, nothing's happening, but watch what happens here as I start to pull this down. Let's reduce our target. Okay, now this is exaggerated, but we can hear what's happening. We've chosen a threshold. We've chosen a frequency. The frequency we adjust just as we always do. We make adjustments in terms of its actual Q or the width or what type of filter slopes that we want to use. But then the target and the threshold is what's causing this to be reduced. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go to the top end. And in this case, we're going to set the static move again. In this case, is going to be set to 0. And the frequency, let's actually use the headphone option on the mouse hover, which we have to continuously hold to find the frequency. Now what we do is we can also enable the dynamics section simply by hovering over band 2. And then we have this option, enable dynamics features, and this will auto expand all this information over here. Now for this, I want to set the target to actually be a positive thing. So where the low end is being reduced, this one, and also we could experiment with the auto threshold, but I think what might be cool too is also let's experiment with these different options over here in terms of the tight short attack, ideal for de-essing purposes. We can adjust the time constants too. At 0, nothing's happening, but watch what happens if we pull this down. Notice this is super fast now. Now we can also change this to tight. So huge difference there. So this is the basics in terms of working with dynamic EQ. We have a threshold. We have a target range. It can either be positive or negative. We have different options in terms of the threshold. Do we set this in manually or do we have this be automatic? And then we have the ability to scale and adjust the attack and release settings and choose between a couple different options. Now, keep in mind, if you wanted to make any changes to this, right, let's actually temporarily fold this. And I'm actually also going to take off the curve menu on hover, so I actually have to select this option. In terms of making any adjustments to this, if I wanted to make any adjustments to these settings, I'm still going to be using the exact same thing. So for example, here, I can adjust the slope. I can adjust the intensity of that by click holding and dragging. And if I mouse hover to my section over here, I can also make some static adjustments if I want to. But then I also have the ability to adjust the actual cue. So we can kind of contour this to our heart's content. So that's the basics of working with dynamic EQ. Now that we know this, in the next section, I think we should actually take a look at putting some of this into practice. All right, so we've already got a really good handle on everything that this plugin can do. We understand the basics of how to create nodes, how to adjust things, how to adjust the cue, how to adjust the width, the slope. Very easy to get around with this. But what I want to do now is, instead of talking about this theoretically, I want to take a look at actually using this in context. So if we take a listen to this track, let's start off with the drums. Okay, so here's our drums. And I think it would probably be good to set an actual cycle range that we can work with. So maybe we'll set some cycle ranges and we'll bring this in, and let's bring this in from this point. Okay, so we're going to start off with our drums. I'm going to open this up. So we know how to do the basics in terms of creating anything. You want an actual low shelf, we can just click, hold, and drag. Give ourselves a little bit of top end and a little bit of bottom end. If there's anything that's bugging us, we can click, hold, and drag. I can solo this out. If anything sounds boxy or anything like that, maybe we can activate our dynamic section. Let's expand this. We currently have it folded. Let's set our target somewhere around here. This is set to auto threshold. Maybe I want to dial this in manually. Just want it to be very gentle. Maybe I even want to back off of my target a bit. Okay. Maybe I want to have something that's happening on this section over here where this is actually bringing things up. So I'm going to push stop for a second. Now I can click this option over here and I can change this to be whatever I need it to be. Let's go to this option over here. And now in this case, I want to enable the dynamic section, and this, I actually want it to be a positive target. So let's change our gain, and I want this to be up a little bit. But now I don't want it to be this broad. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more narrow. Of course, we know that we can make adjustments to things by click holding and dragging over here. And then this now will be, we'll leave this on the automatic threshold. Okay. And then maybe once a little something here. And this could be the same thing. Maybe in this case, I want to enable my dynamics and I want this to be a positive move. Let's set our gain back down and let's set the dynamic range, and this is automatic. Okay, not too much difference there. We're just kind of being light-handed. The other thing to take into account is that maybe some of these things, maybe I don't want them to be happening on the left and right. Maybe I just want them to be happening on the sides. In that case, we're in stereo mode right now. We could enter into mid-side mode. Maybe this one right over here, I want this to be mid. So just being applied to the mid channel. Okay, so let's say that I'm happy with that. I'm going to come out of solo and let's take a listen to the interaction between the bass and the drums. Okay, let's bring in the bass. We have a lot of low end in our kick drum. And in terms of our bass, we have a lot of sub low end here as well. So I can see, because I have the frequency it's being held, I can see that there's a point over here. I'm going to double click and let's just quickly reset the gain over here. And I'm going to change this. I don't want this to be a filter. I want this to be this one right over here. I'm going to double click this and I can make adjustments to the cue or anything if I need to. adjust the frequency. I'm going to come out of solo. Let's say that I want to have my sub bass reacting to my kick drum, and I want to have some gain reduction or some dynamic EQ that's gently bringing things down, but only in the area that it makes sense for the actual sub bass. In this case, let's actually change to a different option over here, which is this one right over here, the parametric mode. And let's enable the dynamic section. Now, instead of this reacting to itself and its own threshold, I actually want to change the side chain to be something that's reacting to another track. And the way that I do this is I've actually already sent a pre-fader send from my drums, has already been sent. So I can react to this sidechain because this sidechain has been enabled. So now if I listen to both of these, okay, let's bypass for a second. Okay, we're currently listening to what we're soloing out. Now, if I was to set this target to something like -6, this is set to automatic. Let's bring this back. This is currently reacting to its internal sidechain. Now watch what happens if I turn this to an external sidechain. Notice this is now reacting completely to the drums that we're sending. Let's actually make this a little bit more evident. Bring down our reduction or our target amount a little bit. Now watch what happens if I deactivate my send. Now we're hearing all of the low end. Now let's listen to these in context. We'll listen again. So you can see that we have the ability to make a lot of different adjustments so we can kind of smooth and contour everything that we need to. Now I'm being way too aggressive with this, but notice that these points that I've created, we have these really easy to adjust flags that we can just click, hold, and drag. But let's give a really quick go over everything. So we've done some very basics in terms of making some adjustments. And the last thing I want to point out is we have a really transparent EQ that gives us a ton of different tools on a lot of different capabilities. But also, if you're a Complete Access Bundle subscriber, which means you have access to SSL as well, the XDynEQ, although this does some things that might seem similar, these can actually complement each other really well because we have some different options in this. Now, there is a tutorial available in Academy if you're interested in more information on this plugin, but these can be used in tandem together. So we've already done some processing with Infinity EQ on this. But now we can bring in an instance of SSL XDynEQ. We'll bring this out of bypass. And I'm doing something completely different here. I'm doing a little bit of tilt, and I'm doing something on the low end to give myself a little bit more. Now the benefit here is that there's some really nice different modes and different options in terms of what's available through XDynEQ, but these can be really complementary to each other. You can use these in tandem. So having the ability to sculpt and do your basics with Infinity EQ just to get things smooth and sounding where you need them to be, and then just bringing in an instance of XDynEQ. Okay. I think the last thing that I might consider doing is bringing in an instance of Infinity EQ on the main outs. And maybe for here, we're just going to go to the mastering section and let's look for something that works. So we have loudness, we have pop. Let's go for loudness. Let's see what this does. Definitely louder. Big change. And then, of course, really easy, just by clicking any one of these, we have the ability to make some changes in terms of what this is doing. This is a stereo mode. If I wanted to move this over to a mid-side mode or anything like that, it is very easy for me to do that. So I can move over to the sides. So that's using Infinity EQ, the updated version by Slate Digital. You have a lot of new features that are added to this. The biggest one being the dynamic EQ, but just having the ability to click and do everything very easily. I'm Marcus Huyskens with Academy, and we will catch you in the next video. Cheers.